The thermal scanner on Pirlo wrist buzzed 3 times, which meant something warm-blooded was moving through Sector 14. That was impossible. Sector 14 was a frozen wasteland 6 kilometers from his habitat module, and nothing warm-blooded survived out there without an envirosuit. Not humans, not the native ice burrowers, not even the genetically modified survival rats the Terran Colonial Authority had released during the failed terraforming initiative of 2218. Pirlo had been station-keeping on Viridian 6 for 11 years, and in all that time only 2 things had triggered his perimeter sensors: a crashed cargo drone and his own reflection when he'd forgotten to disable the scanner before a supply run. He tapped the display, expecting a glitch. The reading held steady. Body temperature approximately 38 degrees, which was almost human. Mass approximately 60 kilograms. Movement speed erratic, slowing. He watched the blip stagger across his screen, like a drunk leaving a cantina at closing time. Except there were no cantinas within 40 light-years, and the nearest drunk was probably Pirlo himself after he'd finished the bottle of Calliston whiskey he'd been saving for his birthday. Computer, confirm bioscan Sector 14. The habitat's voice interface crackled with the particular brand of mechanical indifference that made Pirlo want to throw things. Bioscan confirmed. Organic lifeform detected. Species classification unknown. Vital signs declining. Estimated time to hypothermic collapse 17 minutes. 17 minutes. That was enough time to pretend he hadn't seen anything, to pour himself a drink, to stare at the frozen mountains through his triple-paned window and convince himself that whatever was dying out there wasn't his problem. He'd gotten very good at that over the past decade. The Colonial Authority had posted him to this iceball specifically because he was good at minding his own business. Viridian 6 was a mineral survey station, population 1, and that suited Pirlo just fine. He'd had enough of people back on Earth, enough of their expectations, their disappointments, their inevitable departures. He watched the blip slow further. 14 minutes now. Damn it! He was already pulling on his thermal jacket before he finished the curse. The enviro suit hung by the airlock, scarred and patched from 100 repairs, and he stepped into it with the muscle memory of a man who'd dressed for hostile environments more times than he'd dressed for dinner. Helmet sealed, oxygen recycler humming, boot heaters activated. He grabbed his pulse rifle from the rack by the door, not because he expected trouble, but because expecting trouble was the only reason he was still alive. The outer airlock hissed open, and the cold hit him like a physical force. Viridian 6's atmosphere was technically breathable, but the temperature hovered around -40 on a good day, and today wasn't a good day. The sky was the color of bruised steel, heavy with the promise of another ice storm. The wind cut through the gaps in his suit like it had a personal grudge. Pirlo oriented himself toward the bioscan coordinates and started walking. The terrain was brutal. Frozen tundra stretched in every direction, broken only by jagged outcroppings of black volcanic rock and the skeletal remains of the old terraforming equipment. The Colonial Authority had tried to make Viridian 6 habitable back when Pirlo was still a teenager on Earth, dreaming of distant stars. They'd failed spectacularly. The planet's core generated too much geothermal interference, the magnetic storms fried half their equipment, and the native microorganisms turned out to be aggressively hostile to imported Earth bacteria. Now the only things that lived here were the ice burrowers, the survival rats, and one very stubborn former military engineer who'd run out of reasons to go home. He found her collapsed in a drift of blue-white snow, about 200 meters from his approach vector. At first, his brain refused to process what he was seeing. She looked almost human, maybe 90% there, if you squinted and ignored the obvious differences, but the differences were impossible to ignore. Her skin was a deep rose pink, covered in fine iridescent scales that caught the dim light and scattered it like oil on water. Her hair was black, long and tangled, spread across the snow like spilled ink, and extending from her back, folded against her body in obvious pain, were wings, actual wings, membrane and bone, the color of sunset through smoke, tucked tight against her spine as if she were trying to make herself smaller. She was wearing scraps, that was the only word for it, torn leather straps, battered metal armor pieces that looked ceremonial rather than functional, and ragged fabric that had clearly been designed for a much warmer climate. Her feet were bare, except for what looked like the remains of wrapped bindings. Her fingers ended in blue-tipped nails, and they were clutching her own shoulders as she shivered uncontrollably. Pirlo stopped 3 meters away, rifle raised but not aimed. His mind was running through possibilities at combat speed. Viridian 6 had no indigenous intelligent life. That was documented, verified, stamped and filed by 3 different survey teams, which meant she'd come from somewhere else. A crashed ship. There'd been no distress signals, no orbital debris, a hidden settlement. Impossible to maintain without generating energy signatures his equipment would have detected. A hallucination brought on by 11 years of isolation. Tempting theory, but hallucinations didn't show up on thermal scanners. She looked up at him. Her eyes were the most startling blue he'd ever seen, like Earth's sky on a summer day, like the center of a hot flame. They were filled with exhaustion and something else. Something that looked a lot like the expression he saw in his own mirror every morning. The look of someone who'd stopped expecting anything good to happen. "Please." Her voice was barely audible, cracked and dry. She spoke standard Terran, which was another impossibility to add to the growing list. "I'm freezing. Let me in. I beg you." Pirlo didn't lower his rifle. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" She shook her head weakly. Snow clung to her hair, her scales, her wings. "I'll explain, I promise, but please let me in." "That's not how this works. I don't let unknowns into my habitat. For all I know, you're the advanced scout for an invasion force." A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh if she'd had the strength for it. "Do I look like I could invade anything?" She had a point. She looked like she couldn't invade a heated blanket at this point. Pirlo's suit computer helpfully informed him that her core temperature had dropped another 2 degrees in the time they'd been talking. 9 minutes now. Maybe less, given her physiology was clearly different from human baseline. "I'll reward you," she added, and the absurdity of it almost made him laugh himself. She was lying in the snow, in torn ceremonial rags, clearly dying, with nothing but her own frozen body, and she was offering him payment. "Reward me with what, exactly?" "I don't know yet." Her eyes met his, and despite everything, there was a flicker of stubborn dignity in them. "But I will. I don't lie. My people don't lie. It's physiologically impossible for us." Pirlo had heard that line before, from politicians, salesmen, and at least 3 ex-girlfriends. He didn't believe it for a second, but he also didn't walk away from people dying in the snow. He'd done that once during the war, and the memory still woke him up at night. Fine. He slung his rifle across his back and moved toward her. "But if this is some kind of elaborate trap, I want you to know that I'm going to be very annoyed." He lifted her as gently as he could, mindful of the wings. She weighed less than he expected, her body compact and light-boned, probably an evolutionary adaptation for flight. She tensed against his chest but didn't fight him. She didn't have the strength to fight anyone. Up close, he could see that the scales weren't uniform. They faded to something almost like human skin across her face and hands, with the heavier scaling concentrated on her shoulders, back, and the membranes of her wings. Her ears were slightly pointed, and when she exhaled, a faint wisp of steam escaped her lips that seemed warmer than it should have been. "Don't die before we get there," he said, already trudging back toward the habitat. I hate paperwork, and explaining an alien corpse to colonial authority would involve a lot of paperwork. I'll try, she murmured against his shoulder. Your bedside manner is inspiring. Despite everything, Pirlo almost smiled. The habitat's airlock cycled with its usual grinding reluctance, and then they were inside. The warmth hit them immediately, and she made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a sob. Pirlo carried her through the equipment bay, past the mineral processing station he rarely used, and into the main living quarters. It wasn't much. A single room that served as kitchen, bedroom and workspace, with a separate hygiene pod and a storage area he'd converted into a makeshift workshop. The walls were bare metal except for one photograph, face down on a shelf, and a star chart that he'd stopped updating 3 years ago. He set her down on his bed, the only soft surface in the place, and went to grab the emergency medical kit and every blanket he owned. She was still shivering, her wings twitching involuntarily, her eyes half closed. He wrapped the blankets around her body, careful to accommodate the wings, and activated the heating element built into the mattress. Your feet are in bad shape. He'd pulled off the remnants of her bindings and was examining the damage. Her toes were red and swollen, the scales on her lower legs cracked from the cold, but nothing looked black yet. Another hour out there, and you'd have lost them. Another hour out there, and I'd have lost everything, she said quietly. He didn't argue with that. He brought water, heated to just below scalding, and made her drink it slowly. He found a high-protein ration bar in his supplies and broke it into pieces she could manage. She ate mechanically, without appetite, her eyes tracking his movements around the small space. Computer, run a full bioscan on our guest. Compare against all known sentient species in the colonial database. Scanning. A pause. Bioscan complete. Species identification, no match found. Physiological analysis indicates hybrid genetic markers consistent with multiple evolutionary lineages. Recommend DNA sample for detailed classification. Hybrid of what? Unknown. Certain structural elements suggest convergent evolution with Terran reptilian and avian species, but genetic sequences do not match any catalogued Earth-derived organisms. This species does not exist in colonial records. Pirlo looked at her. She looked back. My people call themselves the Vailori, she said. We're not from your records because we've never had contact with your colonial authority. We've been on Viridian 6 for almost 2,000 years, long before your terraforming ships arrived, long before you decided this planet belonged to you. 2,000 years, that was impossible. The survey teams would have found evidence, structures, artifacts, energy signatures, unless you live underground, Pirlo said slowly. The geothermal caves. That's why the terraforming failed, isn't it? The microorganisms weren't native. They were introduced to protect your territory. She nodded once, a tired acknowledgement. The caves are warm, safe, hidden. We learned long ago that surface dwellers bring trouble. Your people confirmed that lesson when they arrived with their machines and their chemicals and their plans to reshape our world. So your people have been hiding beneath my feet for 11 years and nobody thought to mention it? You were alone, harmless. More importantly, you never came looking. Her eyes closed briefly. We watch. We're very good at watching. The elders decided you weren't a threat. I'm flattered. Pirlo sat down in his workstation chair, keeping distance between them. So what changed? Why are you up here, freezing to death, instead of down there where it's warm and safe? The silence stretched. He watched her face cycle through emotions, pain, shame, anger, and then something harder. Resignation. I was cast out, she said finally. My people no longer acknowledge my existence. I'm forbidden from returning to the caves, from speaking to anyone I knew, from using the resources of my clan. I was sent to the surface to die. Why? She didn't answer immediately. Her hand moved to her stomach, an unconscious gesture, and then quickly away. It doesn't matter. The result is the same. I'm dead to them now, and I would have been dead in truth if you hadn't found me. Pirlo had been a soldier once. He knew when someone was holding back information, and he knew when to push and when to wait. This felt like a moment to wait. What's your name? Silara. I'm Pirlo. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. You can stay here until you're recovered enough to figure out your next move. I've got supplies for one person, but I can stretch them for two if you're willing to eat ration bars that taste like recycled cardboard. They don't actually contain recycled cardboard. The ingredient list is deliberately vague. I try not to think about it. He stood. Get some sleep. We can figure out the rest tomorrow. Pirlo. He paused at the sound of his name. Thank you. I know you had no reason to help me. I had a reason, he said quietly. I'm just not sure it was a good one. He moved to the far corner of the room, pulled out the emergency cot he kept for supply inspectors who never came, and settled in for what promised to be a very strange night. The storm hit around midnight. Pirlo had been drifting in and out of sleep, listening to the wind scream against the habitat walls when he heard her gasp. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, old combat reflexes firing, hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Silara was sitting up in his bed, clutching the blankets to her chest, her eyes wide and her breathing rapid. Bad dream? She shook her head. Bad memory. Her voice was steadier than her hands. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. I wasn't really sleeping anyway. He crossed to the small heating unit and started preparing 2 cups of the bitter synthetic tea that was the closest thing to comfort he had left. Want to talk about it? Not particularly. Fair enough. He handed her a cup and sat down on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. For what it's worth, I have those too, bad memories. They're the main reason I took a posting on a frozen rock, 40 light-years from anywhere. She wrapped her hands around the cup, absorbing the warmth. Her scales seemed to shift color slightly in the dim light, deepening toward purple where they caught the shadows. What happened to you? War. The usual things war does to people. I made choices. Some of them still haunt me. Do you regret them? Pirlo considered the question seriously. Some of them. The ones where I could have done better but didn't. The ones where I let fear make the decision instead of thinking it through. He took a sip of tea. There was one. A civilian shuttle. I was commanding a patrol ship during the Centauri uprising. My sensors picked up an unidentified vessel entering a combat zone. Protocol said to challenge and verify, but we'd lost 3 ships that week to suicide bombers using civilian transponders as disguise, and my crew was scared, and I was scared, and I gave the order to fire first. Silara's eyes were steady on his face. She didn't interrupt. It was a refugee transport, 63 people, including 19 children. They'd panicked when the fighting started and made a run for the jump point. Their communications array was damaged. They couldn't respond to our challenge because their transmitter was dead. That's why you're here. The military cleared me. Rules of engagement, combat conditions, reasonable threat assessment, all the bureaucratic phrases that mean you can live with yourself if you try hard enough. But I couldn't serve anymore. Couldn't look at another ship without seeing what I'd done. So I requested the most isolated posting in the colonial authorities' catalogue, and they gave me Viridian 6. 11 years is a long time to punish yourself. Maybe. Or maybe it's not long enough. He finished his tea and set the cup aside. Your turn. You don't have to tell me everything, but I'd like to understand what I'm dealing with. Why were you cast out? Silara was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she spoke. her voice low and careful. My people are few, fewer every generation. The caves are safe, but they're not infinite. Resources have limits. And so the elders made laws, centuries ago, to control who could bear children and when. Every female of breeding age is matched with a male chosen by the council. The pairing is ceremonial, bound by ritual and obligation. Your purpose is to produce the next generation. If you fail, the consequences are severe. And you failed. I was matched with the High Elder's eldest son, Korath. A position of great honor, supposedly. Her voice turned bitter. 3 years I was his matched partner. 3 years of ceremonies and rituals and examinations by the healers. 3 years of being told that my failure to conceive was a curse on my line, a judgment on my worth. But it wasn't your failure. She looked at him sharply. How would you know that? Because you're alive. He met her gaze without flinching. If you'd really believed you were worthless, you would have laid down in that snow and let it take you. But you didn't. You fought. You walked until you couldn't walk anymore. And then you crawled to my door and asked for help. That's not the behavior of someone who thinks they deserve to die. Solara's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Korath was injured in his youth. A cave collapse. The healers saved his life, but there was damage. Internal damage that he kept hidden, that his family covered up because admitting weakness would have cost them their position. He knew he couldn't father children. He knew it when he accepted the match, and when enough time had passed that questions were being asked, he blamed me, and your people believed him. He's the High Elder's son. I'm nobody. A mid-tier clan, no political alliances, no leverage. My own family accepted the verdict because fighting it would have destroyed them. She set down her cup, her hands no longer shaking. So I was cast out, stripped of my wings. She caught herself, winced. Your wings look intact to me. They clipped the flight tendons, a ceremonial mark of exile. I can spread them, but I can't fly, not anymore. The muscles don't respond properly. She extended one wing slightly, and Pirlo could see the subtle wrongness in the movement, the way it trembled instead of holding firm. I was sent to the surface with nothing. No food, no tools, no protective clothing. The intention was clear. They wanted you dead, but didn't want to do the killing themselves. Exactly. She folded the wing back against her body. So, now you know. I'm an exile from a hidden civilization, carrying the shame of a lie I couldn't disprove, with no way to go home and nowhere else to go. I don't know what reward I could possibly offer you for saving my life, but I meant what I said. My people don't lie. It's something in our biology, a compulsion toward truth, that makes deception physically uncomfortable. So when I promised to reward you, I was binding myself to that promise. I just don't know how to fulfill it yet. Pirlo stood and walked to the window. Outside, the storm had turned the world white. He couldn't see 10 meters beyond the glass. You don't owe me anything, he said. I didn't save your life expecting payment. I did it because leaving someone to die in the cold is something I couldn't live with. I've already got enough ghosts. That's very noble. It's not noble, it's selfish. I wanted to be able to sleep at night. Solara's mouth curved in something that was almost a smile. You have a very strange way of looking at morality. I've had 11 years alone to develop my philosophical positions. Most of them boil down to do what lets you live with yourself and try not to hurt anyone in the process. He turned back to face her. Here's what I can offer you. You can stay here as long as you need. I've got food, shelter, and heat. What I don't have is company. So you'll have to put up with my complete lack of social skills. I'm not going to ask for anything in return, and I'm not going to pretend I have any idea what you should do next. But if you want help figuring it out, I'll help. Why? Because I know what it's like to be thrown away by people who should have protected you. He sat back down, suddenly tired. And because you showed up on my doorstep like a frozen punchline to a joke, the universe has been telling at my expense for 11 years. A man who exiled himself from humanity and now an actual exile literally falls into his life. If that's not cosmic irony, I don't know what is. Silara studied him for a long moment. Then she laughed. It was a surprised, rusty sound, like she'd forgotten how. You're very strange, Pirlo Varo. I prefer eccentric. It sounds more intentional. She laughed again, and this time it came easier. He realized it was the first time he'd heard genuine laughter in years, including his own. Something in his chest loosened slightly, a knot he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. Rest, he told her. We can figure out the meaning of the universe tomorrow. I thought we weren't going to figure anything out. I'm adaptable. It's one of my few positive qualities. He returned to his cot, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he fell asleep without dreaming of burning shuttles. The next 3 weeks established a rhythm. Silara healed slowly, her physiology unfamiliar with the processed nutrients in Pirlo's supplies, but adapting. She couldn't eat the protein bars without getting sick, so he learned to prepare the dehydrated vegetables and grain substitutes in ways that her system could tolerate. She had a surprisingly sophisticated palate for someone who'd lived on cave fungus and bioluminescent fish her entire life. And she criticized his cooking with a dry humor that kept him on his toes. This tastes like thermal paste. You don't know what thermal paste tastes like? I'm assuming it can't be worse than this. She helped where she could, learning the routines of the habitat with quick intelligence. The mineral processing equipment fascinated her. She spent hours examining the circuitry, asking questions about engineering principles that went well beyond casual curiosity. When he explained that he'd been a military engineer before his transfer to survey duty, she nodded, as if that confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Your hands," she said one morning, watching him repair a faulty valve on the water recycler. "You don't move like someone who only processes minerals." "I try to stay in practice. You never know when you'll need to field strip a pulse rifle or rewire an airlock." "Do you miss it? The military?" "I miss having a purpose. I don't miss the killing." She was quiet after that, but the next day she asked him to teach her how the recycler worked, and the day after that she asked about the communication array, and the day after that she was elbow-deep in the power conduit, helping him trace a short that had been plaguing the habitat for 6 months. "You're good at this," he admitted, watching her fingers navigate the cramped space with surprising dexterity. "My people build things too. Different materials, different methods, but the principles translate." She pulled out a corroded connector and held it up triumphantly. "This is your problem. The insulation has degraded." That connector was supposedly rated for 50 years. Apparently, whoever rated it didn't account for Viridian 6's unique talent for making everything miserable. Pirlo laughed before he could stop himself. It felt strange in his throat, like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use. Silara looked at him with something like surprise. And then she smiled, and the expression transformed her face from guarded to genuinely beautiful. That was the moment he realized he was in trouble. He'd been alone for 11 years. He'd made peace with loneliness, or at least he'd convinced himself he had. Now there was someone else in his space, someone who understood isolation and loss, someone who made him laugh and challenged his assumptions and looked at him like he was worth looking at. It was terrifying in a way that had nothing to do with aliens or exile or the mysteries buried beneath the planet's surface. He started finding excuses to be in different parts of the habitat. When she was in the main room, he was in the storage area. When she was checking the external sensors, he was running diagnostics on equipment that didn't need diagnosing. It was cowardly, and he knew it, but he didn't know what else to do. Silara noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "Have I offended you somehow?" she asked one evening, when he'd spent the better part of the day avoiding eye contact. "You've been acting like I'm contagious." "You're not contagious." "Then what?" He opened his mouth to make an excuse, then closed it again. She'd said her people couldn't lie. Maybe it was time he tried the same approach. "I'm not good at this," he said finally. "People, proximity, having someone else in my life. I've been alone for a long time and I chose that, and now you're here and I don't know what to do with it." Silara sat down across from him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out faster than he intended. "No, that's not what I'm saying. I just need to figure out how to be around someone again. I'm out of practice." "That's a relief." She leaned back, her wings rustling slightly. "Because I don't have anywhere else to go, and I've gotten rather attached to your terrible cooking." "It's not terrible, it's character building." "Is that what we're calling it?" They settled into something more comfortable after that. Pirlo stopped hiding, and Silara stopped pretending she didn't notice when he looked at her a moment too long. They talked about their pasts, their regrets, the dreams they'd abandoned. She told him about the cave cities beneath the surface, the bioluminescent gardens where her people cultivated food, the great council chamber where the elders made their pronouncements like gods dispensing judgment. He told her about Earth, about cities so crowded you could walk for hours without seeing the sky, about the war that had shattered 3 colony worlds and left scars on everyone who survived. "You carry a lot of guilt," she observed one night, as they sat by the main viewport, watching stars wheel overhead. The storm had finally broken, and the sky was impossibly clear. "Don't you?" "Some, but not for the same reasons." Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, that gesture he'd noticed before. "I carry regret for the life I might have had if things had been different. Do you want children?" She was quiet for a long time. "I used to dream about it, holding a child of my own, teaching her to fly, watching her grow, but those dreams belong to someone I'm not anymore." "What if you could have that life? Not with Korath, not bound by your people's rules, a different version of it." Silara turned to look at him. The starlight caught her eyes, making them luminous. "Are you asking me something, Pirlo? "I don't know, maybe. I'm not good at this, remember?" "You keep saying that, and yet here we are." "Here we are," he agreed. 2 exiles on a frozen rock, eating terrible food and fixing broken equipment. Not exactly a romance for the ages. "I don't know." Her voice was soft. "It sounds rather nice to me." He reached out, slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. Her scales were warm against his palm, softer than he'd expected. She didn't pull away. "I'm not proposing anything," he said carefully. "I just want you to know that whatever you decide to do, whatever future you're building for yourself, you don't have to do it alone. If you want company, I'm here. If you need space, I'll give you that too. But you're not temporary anymore, Silara. Not to me." Her fingers tightened around his. "I stopped being temporary the moment you carried me out of the snow." That night, she kissed him. It was she who initiated it, rising onto her toes to reach his mouth, her hands gripping his shoulders for balance. He kissed her back, gently at first, then with more urgency. Her wings spread involuntarily, rustling against his arms, and he felt her shiver in a way that had nothing to do with cold. "Is this all right?" he asked, pulling back slightly. "Yes." Her eyes were very bright. "This is exactly right." They moved to the bed together, and for the first time in 11 years, Pirlo didn't sleep alone. 6 weeks later, Silara woke him at dawn with a look on her face that he couldn't read. "Something's happening," she said. "I need to tell you something." His stomach dropped. In his experience, conversations that started with, "I need to tell you something," rarely ended well. "What is it?" She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. I've been feeling different for the past week. Changes in my body. My scales are darker. My appetite has shifted. And this morning, I felt something I haven't felt since I was very young. She looked at him steadily. My people have a sense, an awareness. When our bodies begin to prepare for new life, we know. Pirlo's mind processed her words once, then again, searching for alternative interpretations that didn't involve what he thought she was saying. Are you telling me? I think I'm pregnant, Pirlo. I think I'm carrying our child. The room seemed to tilt slightly. He sat up, ran a hand through his hair, tried to find words. But you said Korath couldn't. The healers examined you. They examined my compatibility with Korath. They never found anything wrong with me because there was nothing wrong with me. Her voice cracked slightly. It was always him. And now, with you... She broke off, tears spilling over despite her obvious effort to contain them. I didn't know if it could happen. I didn't dare hope. But I can feel it, Pirlo. I can feel our child beginning. He moved without thinking, pulling her into his arms, holding her as she cried. Not sad tears, he realized. Relief, joy. The overwhelming release of years spent believing herself broken, finally proven wrong. You're sure? He asked when her breathing steadied. As sure as I can be without a medical scan. My people know our bodies. This feeling doesn't lie. Then we'll need to prepare. His engineer's mind was already spinning, cataloguing resources, calculating requirements. The habitat isn't set up for an infant. I'll need to modify the climate controls, adjust the nutrition systems, figure out what developmental needs a Vailori-human hybrid might have. Pirlo. He stopped talking. She was smiling at him. Tears still wet on her scaled cheeks, but the smile was radiant. You're not upset. Upset? He stared at her incredulously. Silara, you just told me we're going to have a child. Our child. The first cross-species birth in the history of this planet, possibly in the history of the entire colonial authority. It's terrifying and impossible and completely insane, and I have never been happier about anything in my entire life. She kissed him fiercely, and he held her tighter, and outside the viewport, the sun rose over Viridian 6's frozen mountains like a promise. The pregnancy progressed differently than either of them expected. Silara's gestation period, according to her own knowledge of her species, should have been approximately 9 months, similar to humans, but by the 3rd month she was showing far more than a human woman would at the same stage, and the child's movements were visible through her stretched scales. This isn't normal for my people, she admitted, running her hand over the swell of her belly. It's growing faster, stronger. Hybrid vigor, Pirlo suggested. Crossbreeding often produces offspring with enhanced characteristics. Agricultural science has known that for centuries. Are you comparing our child to a crop? I'm comparing our child to nature's tendency to reward diversity. Much more romantic. She snorted, which had become one of his favorite sounds in the universe. The habitat's medical scanner wasn't designed for prenatal care, let alone prenatal care for an unprecedented hybrid species, but Pirlo modified it as best he could. The readings were confusing, vital signs that didn't quite match either human or Vailori baselines, but the overall picture was positive. Strong heartbeat. Normal development, a child that was somehow both of them and something entirely new. Have you thought about names? He asked one evening, as they lay together watching the aurora that sometimes flickered across Viridian 6's sky. In my culture, names are given at the first flight ceremony. The child chooses their own name from a list of ancestral options. And if they can't fly? Silara's face shadowed briefly. Then they're named by their parents on the 3rd moon after birth. I vote we go with option 2 regardless. Less pressure on the kid. He traced patterns on her arm, following the lines of her scales. I was thinking about my grandmother's name, Maeve. It means she who intoxicates. Seemed appropriate for anyone who's going to be half you. Silara laughed. Maeve, I like it. And if it's a boy? I hadn't gotten that far. I was kind of hoping for a girl. Why? Because the universe has been throwing curveballs at me for 40 years, and I figured asking for one specific thing would guarantee I get the opposite. Reverse psychology. That's not how probability works. I never claimed to be rational. They settled on possibilities for both scenarios, mixing Vailori traditions with Terran customs, creating something new. Like they were creating something new in everything else, a life built from the pieces of two broken ones. In the 5th month, Silara's mother came. Pirlo was outside, replacing a damaged solar panel, when his perimeter alarm triggered. He dropped the panel and grabbed his rifle, scanning the horizon. A figure was approaching from the east, moving slowly but deliberately. It took him a moment to recognize the wings, folded tight against a body wrapped in thick furs. Another Vailori. Silara! He keyed his comm. We have company. She appeared at the airlock moments later, her face pale. She hadn't fully emerged, just opened the inner door enough to see out. Her hand was pressed against her swollen belly. I know her, she said quietly. That's my mother. The woman stopped about 20 meters from the habitat, making no move to come closer. She was older than Silara. Her scales faded to a dusty rose, her wings marked with old scars. She carried no weapons, just a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Daughter, she called, her voice carrying across the frozen ground. I have come to speak with you. Silara's jaw tightened. I'm no longer your daughter. The council declared it. The council can declare the sun cold. That doesn't make it true. The older woman's eyes moved to the obvious curve of Silara's belly, and something shifted in her expression. You're carrying. Yes. His? A glance toward Pirlo, not hostile, but assessing. Yes. The woman nodded slowly. Then I have news you need to hear. May I approach? Pirlo looked at Silara. The decision was hers. She stood frozen for a long moment, conflicting emotions warring across her face. Then she stepped fully outside, letting the cold air wash over her. You may approach. But if you've come to take me back for judgment, I haven't. Her mother walked forward until she was within speaking distance. I've come because your exile shattered something in the council that needed shattering. Korath's sister, do you remember Velith? The healer. Yes, she found his medical records, the ones his family had hidden, the proof of his injury, his inability to father children. She brought them before the full council 2 moons ago. Silara's breathing changed. And Korath has been stripped of his position. His family has lost their status. The High Elder was forced to step down. Her mother's voice softened. Your exile has been revoked. You can come home, Silara. The world seemed to stop. Pirlo watched Silara's face, watched the emotions cascade through her. Shock, vindication, grief, anger, and finally something that looked almost like pity. They knew, she said quietly, when they cast me out. They knew there was a possibility I was telling the truth. And they did it anyway. Politics, power, fear. Her mother's voice was heavy with shame. There is no excuse, only the truth. And now they want me back because it's politically convenient. They want you back because the lie has been exposed, because your return would validate the new council's commitment to justice. Silara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Justice. They left me to die in the snow for their political convenience, and now they want me back for the same reason. Yes. Her mother didn't flinch from the accusation. That is exactly what they want. And I am here because I want something different. Or what do you want? The older woman's eyes moved to Silara's belly again. I want to know my grandchild. I want to make whatever amends I can for failing you when you needed me most. I was weak, Silara. I was afraid. I told myself that speaking against the High Elder's family would only make things worse for you. But the truth is that I was a coward, and my cowardice cost you everything. Mother, let me finish. Her voice cracked. I don't expect forgiveness. I haven't earned it. But I am asking for the chance to do better. Whatever future you choose, wherever you decide to build your life, I want to be part of it. Not as your judge, not as your jailer, just as someone who loves you and failed you and wants desperately to try again. The silence stretched. Pirlo remained where he was, rifle lowered but ready, watching two women navigate wounds he could only partially understand. Finally, Silara spoke. I'm not going back. Not to the caves. Not to that life. Whatever they've decided about my status, I've built something here, something real. I know. Her mother's voice was soft. I'm not asking you to return. Then what are you asking? To visit, to send messages, to know when this child is born that it has a grandmother who will move mountains to protect it, even if those mountains are political ones. Silara looked at Pirlo. He gave her a small nod. This was her choice, but he'd support whatever she decided. She turned back to her mother. You can stay tonight. We'll talk. But I'm not promising anything beyond that. Her mother's shoulders sagged with relief. That's more than I deserve. They went inside together and Pirlo followed, wondering how many more impossible things this frozen planet had in store for them. Silara's mother, her name was Aerith, Pirlo learned, stayed for 3 days. The conversations were difficult at first, heavy with unspoken accusations and carefully measured words. But gradually, something shifted. Aerith told stories about Silara's childhood that made her daughter laugh despite herself. She asked intelligent questions about the habitat systems and seemed genuinely fascinated by Terran technology. And when she looked at Silara's growing belly, her expression held something that Pirlo recognized, the desperate hope of someone trying to rebuild a bridge they'd helped destroy. On the third morning, Aerith prepared to leave. She'd brought gifts from the caves, Valori blankets woven from thermal moss, herbal preparations that Silara said would help with the later stages of pregnancy, and a small, carved figure that had belonged to Silara's father. He would have wanted you to have this, Aerith said, pressing it into her daughter's hands. He died believing you were innocent. He never stopped fighting for you in the council. It killed him in the end. The strain, the political warfare, the knowledge that he couldn't protect his own child. Silara's eyes filled with tears. She'd known her father was dead, but not how, not why. He loved you more than anything in the world, Aerith continued, and so do I. I was too weak to show it when it mattered, but I'm not too weak anymore. Mother and daughter embraced, wings folding around each other in a gesture that Pirlo understood instinctively as something sacred. He stepped back to give them privacy, but Silara reached out and drew him into the embrace as well. He's family now, she told her mother. Both of them are. Aerith looked at Pirlo with eyes that saw more than he was comfortable with. You've given her something she never had before, she said. A choice. I will not forget that. I didn't give her anything. She chose it herself. You gave her the space to choose. That's rarer than you know. After Aerith left, Silara stood at the viewport for a long time, watching the small figure disappear into the white. Are you all right? Pirlo asked. I don't know. She turned to face him, one hand resting on her belly. I spent months hating her, hating all of them. And now I find out my father died defending me. My mother was drowning in her own guilt, and the whole rotten system that cast me out has already begun to crumble. She shook her head. I don't know how to feel about any of it. You don't have to know yet. He crossed to her, took her hands. You've got time. We've got time. Whatever you decide about your people, your past, your future, we'll figure it out together." She leaned into him, her wings rustling against his back. "Do you ever think about what kind of parent you'll be?" "Constantly. I'm terrified I'll mess it up." "And me too. Then we'll be terrified together. It'll be fun." She laughed, and he kissed her forehead, and outside the viewport, the sun climbed higher over a world that was slowly, impossibly becoming home. The child came on a night of perfect stillness, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Silara woke Pirlo with a grip on his arm that nearly broke skin, her face contorted with a pain that was both terrible and transformative. "It's time," she gasped. "She's coming." The next 6 hours were the longest of Pirlo's life. He'd prepared as best he could, studied human and Violori birthing practices, modified the habitat's emergency medical station for this exact moment. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of it. The sounds, the intensity, the terrifying responsibility of being the only person who could help. Silara was incredible. Even in agony, she guided him through what needed to happen, her knowledge of her own body filling in the gaps that no amount of research could cover. He held her hand when she needed support and stepped back when she needed space. He cleaned and prepared and waited, his engineer's mind treating each challenge as a problem to be solved. And then, just as the first light of dawn began to pink the horizon, their daughter was born. She was small, smaller than he'd expected, with skin that shifted between his own pale tone and her mother's rose scales, depending on the light. Her eyes, when they opened, were the same impossible blue as Silara's. And on her back, tucked against her tiny spine, were wing buds. Not full wings, not yet, but the clear beginning of something that would grow. "Maeve," Silara whispered, holding the child against her chest. Tears streamed freely down her face. "Her name is Maeve." Pirlo looked at his daughter, at this impossible, beautiful creature who was somehow both of them and something entirely new, and felt something break open in his chest. All the guilt, all the isolation, all the years of punishing himself for sins he could never undo. It didn't disappear exactly, but it shifted. It made room for something else. Hope, maybe, or purpose, or just the simple, overwhelming miracle of new life. "Hello, Maeve," he said softly, reaching out to touch her tiny hand. Her fingers wrapped around his, stronger than they should have been, and held on. "She's perfect," Silara said. "She's ours." "Yes." Silara looked at him, exhausted and radiant and more beautiful than the stars. "She's ours." Outside, the sun rose over Viridian 6, and somewhere beneath the frozen ground, word was spreading through the cave cities that something unprecedented had happened on the surface. A Violori exile and a human engineer had done what diplomacy, politics, and 2,000 years of hiding had never accomplished. They'd built a bridge between two worlds, and they'd done it the oldest way possible, by creating a life that belonged to both. 6 months later, Pirlo stood outside the habitat, watching Maeve take her first faltering steps across the packed snow. Her wing buds had grown into small, functional wings, and she kept spreading them for balance, a natural instinct that made him smile every time. Silara was beside him, her own wings extended in the warm afternoon light. She could still feel them, even if she couldn't fly, and she said that watching Maeve discover hers helped heal something she'd thought was lost forever. "The council has formally requested an audience," she said, not looking at him. "I know. I read the message. They want to establish diplomatic relations, human Violori exchange programs, shared research initiatives. Ambitious. They're terrified." She finally turned to meet his eyes. "Your colonial authority has noticed their existence. They've been getting survey requests, official inquiries, demands for geological reports that they can't provide without revealing the caves. They need an intermediary. And they think we're it. They think Maeve is it, the first hybrid, living proof that coexistence is possible. Pirlo watched his daughter stumble, catch herself on her wings, and keep walking with the determination that had clearly come from her mother. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Silara was quiet for a moment. "I want to help them, despite everything they did to me, because helping them helps her, and because the alternative is watching two societies that could be allies destroy each other through fear and misunderstanding." She paused. "But I won't do it unless you're with me. You think I'd let you face a cave full of politicians alone? I think you've spent 11 years avoiding exactly that kind of situation. That was before." He reached for her hand, laced his fingers through hers. "Before you, before Maeve, before I remembered what it felt like to be part of something bigger than my own regret." "Tim, so you'll come?" "I'll come. I'll complain about it the entire time, and I'll probably offend at least 3 council members with my complete lack of diplomatic skills, but I'll come." Silara laughed, that wonderful sound that had become as necessary to him as air. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Maeve had reached the edge of the snowfield, where the ground turned to exposed rock. She stood there, looking out at the mountains, her wings spread wide to catch the last light of the sun, and then, with no warning, she jumped. Pirlo's heart stopped. He was moving before he could think, ready to catch her, ready to... She flew. Only a few meters, only for a few seconds, her tiny wings beating furiously against the cold air. But she flew. She landed hard, tumbling into a drift of snow, and came up laughing. Her blue eyes found her parents, and her face split into a grin that was pure joy. "Did you see?" she called, her voice high and bright. "Did you see?" "We saw," Silara called back, and she was crying again. But these were different tears. These were the tears of someone watching the impossible become real. Pirlo pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders, watching their daughter pick herself up and try again, and again, and again. "So much for clipped wings being hereditary," he said. "She's not like me. She's not like you. She's something new. She's something better." Silara leaned into him. "Is this what you imagined when you came to Viridian 6, when you decided to hide from the universe?" "Not even close." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her, the warmth of her. "The universe, it turns out, had other plans." "Do you regret them? The universe's plans?" Pirlo thought about the question seriously, the way he thought about everything now. He thought about frozen nights and terrible ration bars, about scars that would never fully heal, and ghosts that would never completely disappear. He thought about a woman with wings and scales who had stumbled into his life with nothing but a promise and a stubborn refusal to die. "No," he said finally. "Not for a single second." Maeve flew again, higher this time, longer. Her laughter echoed off the mountains, and somewhere in the caves below, a new chapter of history was being written. The frozen Dragonwoman had been saved by a man with nothing to give. She had rewarded him with everything that mattered. And the promises of the poor had turned out to be worth more than all the riches in the galaxy.